Margaret Sullivan was 36 when she met Marcus Ribeiro at an art gallery opening in New York in the spring of 2018. She never imagined that chance encounter by the champagne table would change her life forever, and not in the way she had dreamed. Margaret was everything you would expect from a successful American gallery curator. Meticulous, discerning, with a solid career at a prestigious Manhattan art house. Her signature red hair, always perfectly styled, had become something of a trademark in New York's elite art circles. After a devastating heartbreak 3 years earlier, she had thrown herself into her work, filling the emotional void with exhibitions, auction catalogs, and international art fairs. Her close friends noticed the guardedness in her eyes, but Margaret always deflected the subject with a practiced smile and comments about how she was focused on discovering new talent. Marcus was 45 years old, with a smooth bald head that caught the gallery lights, piercing blue eyes, and an accent that seemed to hint at exotic mystery. He introduced himself as a collector and businessman, owner of a chain of luxury restaurants and boutique hotels across Brazil. "I'm building an empire down in Rio," he said with calculated charm, showing photos on his phone of beachfront properties, chic dining establishments, and penthouses overlooking Guanabara Bay. "I sourced most of the art myself. I have an eye for talent, for beauty, for things that are rare and undervalued." What began as a casual conversation about contemporary painters quickly evolved into long dinners at exclusive restaurants, private gallery viewings after hours, and constant messages even after the opening ended. Marcus had a special way of making Margaret feel understood, appreciated, cherished. He asked about her dreams, her insecurities, her frustrations with the rigid art world. He listened, really listened, in a way her ex-boyfriend never had. "You're wasting your gift here," Marcus would say, holding her hand during video calls from Rio. "New York is predictable, saturated. But in Brazil, there's raw passion, undiscovered artists, a hunger for culture. You could be a pioneer there. You could build something meaningful, something that matters." He painted Rio not just as a city, but as a destiny, a place where her talents would flourish, where she could live lavishly without compromise, where she could wake up to Christ the Redeemer watching over her sanctuary. In the first 4 months, Marcus visited New York 3 times. Each visit was carefully orchestrated romance. Flowers delivered to her gallery, dinner reservations at restaurants normally booked a year in advance, promises whispered in the darkness about a future together. He met Caroline, Margaret's best friend and business partner since college, during his second visit. Caroline didn't trust him from the moment she shook his hand. "Something's off," Caroline said bluntly as they had drinks at their favorite wine bar after Marcus returned to Brazil. "He's too polished. Too calculated. He asks the right questions, says the right things, but it feels rehearsed somehow." "You're being paranoid," Margaret replied, feeling defensive. "After what happened with James, you don't trust any man who shows genuine interest in me." James was her ex-boyfriend, a sculptor who had cheated and lied for 2 years before Margaret finally discovered the truth. The wound still ached. "This isn't about James," Caroline insisted, leaning forward. "I did some research. His restaurants are real, yes. His hotels exist. But when I dig deeper, the ownership structures are murky. Shell companies. Holding firms. And his social media presence, it's all curated perfection. Too perfect. No messy humanity." Margaret felt a familiar irritation rising. "He's Brazilian. He's a businessman. Of course his online presence is professional. Not everyone shares their whole life on Instagram like you do." But Caroline's words had planted a seed, one Margaret tried to ignore. That night, alone in her apartment, she did what her friend had suggested. She searched for Marcus Ribeiro online. What she found seemed to confirm his story: a sleek website for his restaurant group, features in Brazilian business magazines, photos at charity galas, reviews of his establishments. Everything checked out. What Margaret didn't find, and what no superficial search could reveal, was that Marcus Ribeiro wasn't his real name. That the ownership documents were forged. That there were at least 5 women from Europe and North America who had made the exact same journey Margaret was about to make, and that the lives they returned to, if they returned at all, were forever altered by what they found behind the glittering facade of Rio's elite social scene. The marriage proposal came in August 2018, during a private dinner on a rented yacht off the coast of Ipanema. He took her to the upper deck as sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, knelt down on one knee, and opened a small platinum box. "Margaret, you've awakened something in me I thought was dead," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Come to Rio. Be my wife. Build an empire with me. Be the woman who stands beside me as I create something extraordinary." The ring was stunning, a flawless emerald surrounded by brilliant diamonds. Margaret felt tears stream down her face as she said yes. At that moment, with Marcus holding her and the city lights beginning to twinkle below them, all of Caroline's warnings seemed absurdly small-minded. "Let's make this real," Marcus suggested as they celebrated with champagne. "Come for 3 months. Live in my penthouse. Meet my colleagues, my family, my world. Experience what our life could be. I want you to choose this freely, with full knowledge of what you'd be gaining." Margaret agreed. It seemed not just reasonable, but romantic, a man so confident in their future that he wanted her to see everything before committing. She negotiated a 3-month sabbatical with her gallery, booked her flight for September, and began making plans. When she told Caroline, her friend's reaction was immediate and fierce. "Don't go," Caroline said flatly. "I'm begging you. Don't do this. You've known him for 5 months. 5 months. And now you're flying to his house in a city where you don't know anyone, in a country where you don't speak the language fluently. This is textbook predatory behavior." "Predatory?" Margaret laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Caroline, he's a successful businessman. He's intelligent, cultured, generous. The fact that he's fallen in love with me isn't a conspiracy." "That's exactly what they count on," Caroline said, her voice breaking slightly. "The isolation, the romance, the promises of a better life. He's removing you from your support system, putting you in a place where you're dependent on him for everything. Language, navigation, social connections. Everything. So what are you saying? That he's dangerous? That he's planning something?" Margaret asked coldly. "Do you have any actual evidence, or is this just your trust issues talking?" Caroline's face fell. "No. I don't have evidence. But please promise me you'll check in every single day. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you get on a plane and you come home immediately. Promise me." "I promise," Margaret said, already emotionally withdrawn from the conversation. Caroline was being unreasonable, letting her own fears poison something beautiful. Marcus was kind, attentive, successful. It wasn't a crime to fall in love quickly. It was what poets wrote about. The flight to Rio de Janeiro was scheduled for September 10, 2018. Margaret packed carefully: light dresses, expensive sunscreen, her laptop for her remote curatorial work, a journal for sketching art ideas. Marcus had promised to pick her up at the airport personally. "I can't wait to show you the city, mi amor," he wrote in his final message before she boarded. "Our life together begins now." As the plane lifted off from JFK, Margaret watched New York disappear beneath the clouds, a glittering grid fading into gray. She felt a mixture of exhilaration and nervous anticipation, but pushed any lingering doubts aside. This was reinvention, this was destiny, this was her second chance at happiness. What Margaret didn't know, and what she would discover only after weeks of mounting dread, was that she wasn't Marcus Ribeiro's first ambitious Western woman. She wasn't the second or third. She wasn't even the fifth. And the luxury penthouse he had so proudly shown her in photographs, and the restaurant empire he spoke of with such conviction, were both part of something far more complicated and sinister than she could have imagined. Behind the glittering beaches and carnival-ready smiles of Rio de Janeiro lay a decades-old operation, one that had caught the attention of Interpol, that had left a trail of forged documents and broken lives, that involved powerful people with reasons to keep their secrets buried deep. Brazilian and American authorities were only beginning to connect the pieces. But they were looking, searching through a maze of false identities and shell companies, trying to trace the pattern. For now, though, as Margaret's plane descended through the tropical clouds toward Rio, as she caught her first glimpse of the Christ statue standing sentinel over the city, she still believed she was flying toward her happily ever after. The humid warmth of Rio hit her like a perfumed wave as she stepped out of the air-conditioned terminal, her red hair catching the Brazilian sun. Marcus was waiting outside the arrivals area, exactly where he had promised. He was wearing an expensive linen suit and designer sunglasses, and his smile was as captivating as it had been on their video calls. "Margaret," he called out, striding toward her and pulling her into an embrace. "You're here. You're finally here." Margaret felt relief wash through her. All of Caroline's warnings, all the small doubts that had gnawed at her during the flight, suddenly seemed ridiculous. This was Marcus, her fiancé, the man who loved her. He was real and present and exactly as he had promised. "How was the flight?" he asked, retrieving her luggage and guiding her through the terminal. "You must be exhausted, but wait until you see the penthouse. All your tiredness will disappear." Marcus's car was a sleek black Mercedes with darkened windows. As they drove through the chaotic streets of Rio, Margaret observed everything with fascination. The vibrant street life, the music bleeding from open doors, the Portuguese words she could only partially understand. Marcus talked constantly, pointing out landmarks, telling stories about the city's history and culture, making elaborate plans for her first week. "First, we get you settled and rested," he said, placing a proprietary hand on her knee as he drove. "Tonight, a special dinner at my best restaurant. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything. The penthouse views, my business associates, the life that awaits you." "What about my work?" Margaret asked. "You mentioned a home office with reliable internet. I have gallery business to handle." Of course, Marcus laughed smoothly. "Everything is arranged for you. But today, just relax, yes? You work too hard, Margaret. You need to learn to enjoy life. To surrender to the moment." They drove for nearly an hour, gradually leaving the vibrant tourist districts of Copacabana and Ipanema, moving into quieter residential neighborhoods. Margaret noticed the landscape shifting. Fewer chic hotels and boutiques, more modest buildings, some with visible security gates, the architecture growing less polished. "It's quite far from the beach," she remarked, trying to sound casual. "That's what makes it exclusive," Marcus explained. "Not one of those gaudy hotel high-rises full of tourists. My penthouse is in a private, secure building. Authentic Rio, not the postcard version." Finally, he turned onto a winding road lined with high concrete walls and dense vegetation. An impressive black metal gate appeared, and Marcus pressed a remote. A uniformed guard, young and serious-faced with a thin scar running down his neck, appeared and waved them through without a word. "That's Gustavo," Marcus said casually. "Security. Excellent man, very discreet. Doesn't speak English, only Portuguese and Spanish." The building that revealed itself was elegant but fortress-like, a modern structure of glass and steel, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. They parked in an underground garage, and Marcus led her to a private elevator. The penthouse, when the doors opened, was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, contemporary art on the walls, luxurious furnishings. And yet, Margaret noticed things that didn't quite fit the picture. The internet router in the corner of the living room was industrial grade, unusual for a residence. Security monitors visible in what appeared to be an office alcove. The glass on some windows had a faint reflective quality that suggested one-way capability. "It's incredible," she said, because that was expected of her. "Beautiful beyond words." "Rest now," Marcus suggested, kissing her forehead. "I've arranged dinner here this evening. Something special prepared by my private chef." After he left, Margaret finally allowed exhaustion to overtake her. She lay on the enormous bed, reached for her phone to message Caroline that she'd arrived safely, and noticed something troubling. The signal was sporadic, dropping in and out. She tried to connect to the Wi-Fi Marcus had provided, but the password he'd given her didn't work. Frustrated and tired, she decided to address it later. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she woke, darkness had fallen outside. Disoriented, she checked her watch, 10:15 p.m. She'd slept for over 7 hours. She rose quickly, feeling guilty, and opened the bedroom door. The penthouse was dimly lit, and on a side table, she found a tray of food covered with a cloth, a handwritten note beneath it. "Let you rest. Dinner whenever you wake. Marcus." She tried to call Caroline on WhatsApp, but the connection was so unstable that the call dropped twice. Finally, she managed to send a text, "Arrived safely. The place is stunning but feels very controlled. We'll call tomorrow when connection is better." Caroline's response was immediate. "Call me daily. Send me your exact location. Do not let him isolate you." Margaret obeyed, sharing her GPS coordinates. Only then did she notice something that made her stomach tighten. The coordinates showed she was located in a remote area, nearly an hour from the central Rio she knew from maps. Much farther than Marcus had indicated during their drives. The next 3 days fell into an unsettling pattern. Marcus was attentive, affectionate, omnipresent, but his presence was beginning to feel constraining rather than romantic. When Margaret mentioned wanting to explore the neighborhood alone, he insisted on accompanying her, for her safety. When she suggested visiting a museum or gallery she'd researched, he said it would be better to wait until she'd acclimated. The internet remained maddeningly inconsistent. Marcus always had explanations. Service provider issues, infrastructure problems, a technician coming tomorrow. But tomorrow never arrived. Margaret met the staff. Gustavo, the security guard who never smiled. Isabella, the housekeeper who prepared meals but avoided eye contact. And Diego, who Marcus introduced as his business associate and personal assistant, though Margaret never witnessed him actually assisting with anything. On the 4th day, everything changed. Marcus was in his office taking business calls. Margaret, exploring the penthouse more thoroughly, ventured into a hallway she hadn't noticed before. At the end of it was a door, always closed. Curious, she tried the handle almost absently, not expecting it to give. It opened. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the penthouse. There was a professional-grade laptop on a desk, multiple phones, and what made Margaret's blood freeze, a large whiteboard on the wall covered with women's names, dates, and amounts written in careful handwriting. She saw European names. Ingrid, 18,000 euros. Sophie, 24,500 euros. Natasha, 21,000 euros. Caroline, 16,000 euros. And in fresh, recent writing in the lower right corner, Margaret, USA, potential $35,000 plus. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Margaret's heart exploded in her chest. She slipped out of the room, quietly closing the door, and hurried back to the bedroom, her mind spinning. Her hands were shaking. Her breath came in short gasps. What was that room? What did those numbers mean? Why were there other women's names listed like inventory? When Marcus appeared in the bedroom doorway minutes later, his smile was the same as always. But Margaret looked at him differently now, seeing something she'd been trained not to see. That night, during dinner, she watched him with new understanding. The way he controlled every moment of her day. How he always had reasons for her not to use her phone. How he'd asked detailed questions about her finances, her family, who in New York would know exactly where she was. "You're quiet tonight," Marcus observed, trailing his fingers down her arm. "Is something wrong, querida?" "Just tired," Margaret lied, forcing a smile. But later, alone in the darkened bedroom while Marcus claimed to have work to finish in his office, Margaret finally admitted the terrible truth to herself. Caroline had been right. She had made a catastrophic mistake, and now she was isolated in a remote penthouse, in a city where she barely spoke the language, with a man who was clearly not who he pretended to be. The question was no longer whether she should leave. It was how she could possibly escape. Margaret spent the night awake in the darkness, listening to every sound. The hum of the security system. Low voices emanating from the office area. The sound of the building's garage door opening and closing at 2:47 a.m. Who was arriving? Who was leaving? At dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her, only to be broken by a knock on the door. Marcus entered with a breakfast tray, smiling as radiantly as ever. "Good morning, my love. I thought we deserved a special day. I'm taking you to show you my restaurant empire. You wanted to see my life, yes?" Margaret forced enthusiasm into her voice. "Really? That would be wonderful." But as she ate, she noticed something chilling. Marcus couldn't look away from her. He watched her every move, every micro-expression, as if evaluating something. "Did you sleep well?" he asked casually. "I heard you moving around the apartment yesterday afternoon. In the hallway near the office." Margaret's blood ran cold. She kept her face neutral. "I was just exploring. It's such a fascinating space." "It really is," Marcus said softly, and something in his tone confirmed what she already knew. He knew she'd found the room. He knew what she'd seen. "You know," he continued, "curiosity can be very dangerous, Margaret, especially when one doesn't fully understand the situation." It wasn't a casual observation. It was a threat. The tour of his restaurants never happened. An urgent business problem required his attention. He promised it would happen tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went, along with a series of convenient excuses. Margaret began to understand the truth. She wasn't staying in a penthouse. She was in a prison designed to look like luxury. On the 6th day, Margaret discovered her passport was missing from the desk where she'd placed it. "Marcus," she confronted him by the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to keep her voice steady. "My passport. It's gone. Do you know where it is?" He didn't even pretend surprise. "Yes. I placed it in the office safe. There's been a lot of theft in this building. I'm protecting your documents." "I'd like it back," Margaret said carefully. "Of course," he smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "When we need it." "But why would you need it now? You're not thinking of leaving, are you?" It was phrased as a joke. They both knew it wasn't. That afternoon, while Marcus was occupied with endless phone calls in his office, Margaret managed to send a desperate text to Caroline. "I need help. I can't leave. He took my passport. Something is very wrong." Caroline's response was immediate, "Calling police now. Stay safe. I'm coming to get you." Before Margaret could even process this, Diego appeared with a juice on a tray. His eyes went directly to the phone in her hand. "Mr. Marcus asked me to bring this," he said flatly, and left without another word. Margaret didn't touch the juice. 15 minutes later, Marcus appeared, his expression grim. "Who were you texting?" he asked quietly. "Caroline," Margaret said, her heart hammering. "She's worried because I haven't called in days." "Give me the phone." "No. These are private." Marcus crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her wrist with terrifying force. Margaret cried out in pain as he twisted her arm, his grip brutal and unyielding. The phone fell from her fingers. He caught it before it hit the ground, his eyes scanning the screen where Caroline's message glowed. "Calling the police?" he said softly. "Do you really think that will help?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed through the penthouse. "Half the federal police are compensated by me, Margaret. The other half doesn't care about American women who come here voluntarily on tourist visas. Who will they believe? A confused tourist, or a successful businessman with connections?" Margaret felt terror flood through her. "Please. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone anything, I swear." "That's what Ingrid said," Marcus interrupted coldly. "That's what Sophie said. Do you know where they are now?" Margaret didn't want to know. God, she didn't want to know. "Lock her in the bedroom," Marcus ordered Diego, who appeared as if summoned by thought alone. "No food until she understands cooperation." As Diego pulled her down the hallway, Margaret caught sight of Isabella, the housekeeper, standing in the kitchen doorway. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Margaret saw something flicker across the older woman's face. Pity, perhaps even guilt, before Isabella looked away and disappeared back into the kitchen. Locked in the bedroom, Margaret's carefully maintained composure shattered. She pounded on the door until her fists bled. She screamed for help until her voice gave out. She tried the windows, but they were sealed somehow, the glass reinforced. No one came. No one answered. As darkness fell, Margaret sat in the corner of the bed, hugging her knees, shaking despite the heat. She thought of Caroline, of her mother in Connecticut, of the gallery and the life of meaning she'd abandoned for a man she'd known for 5 months. All those true crime stories she'd read, All those documentaries about missing women, she'd always wondered how they could be so naive. Now she understood. Isolation wasn't imposed all at once. It was gradual, calculated, disguised as love and adventure. And now, locked in a room in a city where no one knew her real location, her passport stolen and her phone destroyed, Margaret finally grasped the full scope of her catastrophe. The question wasn't whether she'd made a mistake. The question was whether she would survive it. 2 days passed. Or was it 3? Margaret lost track of time in the darkness. The curtains sealed shut, no response to her cries. Food arrived once daily, pushed through a half-open door by Diego, his dead eyes watching her as he locked it again behind him. She rationed the water from the bathroom tap, tried to maintain sanity through mental exercises, reciting poems she'd learned in high school, solving calculus problems, planning escape routes that all led to the same impossibility. Locked door, sealed window, no communication. On the third night, or perhaps the fourth, something shifted. Margaret was half asleep when she heard a key turning in the lock. She tensed, expecting Diego or Marcus. Instead, Isabella rushed in, closing the door quietly behind her. "Quickly," she whispered in Portuguese-accented English. "He went out with Gustavo to meet someone. Carlos is passed out in the office. We have maybe 10 minutes." Margaret stumbled to her feet on legs weak from confinement. Are you helping me?" "I am not a bad person," Isabella said, and Margaret saw tears streaming down her weathered face. "I work here because I have 2 daughters and a grandson to feed. But what he does, what he's done, it's not right. It's not human." "The other women," Margaret urged, grabbing Isabella's arm. "Ingrid, Sophie, Natasha. What happened to them?" Isabella's face twisted with something like guilt. "Ingrid, she liquidated her entire estate in Switzerland. Transferred everything. Nearly €500,000. Once the money cleared, he let her leave. And Sophie." "Natasha tried to escape," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "They found her in the city. She came back. Different. Broken. She left after 2 months. I don't know what happened to her after that." Margaret's mind reeled. "We have to go. Now." "No," Isabella said firmly. "If we run together, he will find us both and kill us. But I can get you to the street. From there, you must find the police, real police, not the ones he owns. The ones at the precinct near Leblon. Tell them everything." Behind them, a sound. Footsteps on the stairs. "He's back," Isabella whispered urgently. "I have to go. Listen to me. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., when Marcus goes to his office for his usual calls, be ready at the back window. Someone will come. When they signal, you run. Don't hesitate. Don't look back." "Who?" Margaret asked desperately. "Who's coming?" "People who can actually help. People Marcus doesn't own." Isabella pressed something into Margaret's hand, an old burner phone. "Hide this. Call this number." She showed Margaret a contact labeled D. Rodriguez, Private Investigator. "But only when you're ready to escape. Once you make that call, there's no going back." "Why are you doing this?" Margaret whispered. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I have a daughter your age. She came to Brazil 5 years ago to be a model." Isabella's voice broke. "She's not the same anymore. If I can save one girl, maybe God will forgive me for not saving her sooner." Footsteps grew louder. Isabella shoved the phone under Margaret's mattress and rushed to the door, speaking loudly in Portuguese about checking medications. Then she was gone. Margaret's heart thundered as she heard Diego's voice responding with disinterest. She waited, counting her heartbeats, until silence returned. Then she carefully retrieved the phone. 18% battery. 1 bar of signal, sometimes none. But it was a lifeline. She turned it off immediately to conserve power and hid it deep in her pillowcase. For the first time since her imprisonment, Margaret felt something other than despair. Hope. Fragile, dangerous hope that could be destroyed in an instant. but hope nonetheless. Marcus returned the next morning. Margaret heard him in the hallway, talking to Diego. She prepared herself mentally, remembering Isabella's words: cooperate, cry, promise everything. When he entered, Margaret was sitting on the bed, her eyes deliberately reddened from rubbing. Her posture was deliberately submissive. It was an act. Her survival depended on a perfect performance. "Margaret," Marcus said carefully, "we need to talk like civilized people." "I'm sorry," she said immediately, letting her voice tremble. "I was scared. Confused. I shouldn't have doubted you. It was Caroline. She's always been overprotective, paranoid. She planted all these ideas." Marcus studied her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, deciding whether to believe her. "You hurt me," he said finally, sitting on the bed's edge. "I opened my heart to you. I offered you everything. My life, my business, my love. And you tried to betray me by calling the police. I know it was a terrible mistake." Margaret forced out tears, drawing on very real terror. "After James, my ex, I have trust issues. It's hard for me. But I want to trust you. I want this to work." She watched his expression shift, soften almost imperceptibly. "Almost. If we're going to build a life together," Marcus said slowly, "there must be complete trust. Total transparency." "There will be," Margaret said. "What do you need from me?" "To prove I'm committed." There it was, the opening he'd been waiting for. Marcus leaned forward, taking her hand in his. "I'm having temporary cash flow problems," he said, and Margaret had to suppress an instinct to laugh at the brazen lie. "An investor pulled out. I need capital to maintain operations until the season peaks. Could you help me? A loan, not a gift. Maybe $40,000 or $50,000. Cold horror crystallized inside her. He knew exactly how much she had. He'd investigated her finances before they even met. "I have savings," Margaret said slowly. "About $40,000. I was saving to buy property in New York, but—" She squeezed his hand. "If it's for us. For our future together." Marcus's smile was genuine this time, but it was the smile of a predator closing its jaws around prey. "You're incredible," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll return your phone. Give you access to the office computer. Make the transfer tomorrow. After that, we start fresh. We forget all of this happened." That evening, Margaret had dinner with Marcus for the first time in days. He was charming again, telling stories, making plans, painting pictures of their future once this financial crisis passed. Margaret laughed at appropriate moments. She touched his arm with feigned affection. It was nauseating. It was necessary. When he kissed her goodnight at the bedroom door, a possessive, domineering kiss that made her skin crawl, she forced herself to kiss him back. "Tomorrow we begin again," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed, already planning her escape. Alone in her room past 11 p.m., Margaret waited a full hour listening to the penthouse settle into silence. Then she retrieved Isabella's phone from the pillowcase. 14% battery. One signal bar wavering. With trembling fingers, she typed, "My name is Margaret Sullivan. American. I'm imprisoned in a penthouse in Rio. A man named Marcus Ribeiro, not his real name, is extorting money from me. He has killed at least one woman. I'm being forced to transfer $40,000 tomorrow. I don't know if he'll let me live after. I'm trapped. Please help." She added the address she'd glimpsed on a piece of mail and hit send. The minutes stretched like hours. Delivered. Not read. Her battery dropped to 10%, 9%. Then 3 dots appeared. "Margaret, this is Diego Rodriguez. Private investigator. I know this place and this man. You are in extreme danger. Do not transfer the money. He has no intention of letting you leave alive. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., his routine time for office calls. Be ready at your back window. A rescue team will be there. Bring nothing. Just run when we signal." Delete everything now. Margaret read it 3 times, committing every word to memory, then deleted both messages. She turned off the phone and hid it again. 2 p.m. less than 15 hours. She lay in darkness, eyes open, and began counting down the minutes until freedom or death. At this point, she wasn't certain which was more likely. Margaret barely slept. At 1:30 p.m., she positioned herself near the back window, hidden behind the curtain, her heart detonating in her chest. She could hear Marcus in the office below, his voice rapid in Portuguese, conducting business calls she couldn't fully follow. 1:45 p.m. She carefully examined the window. It was sealed somehow, but the metal hinges looked old, corroded by years of salt air. 1:52 p.m. movement in the vegetation outside. Her breath caught. 2 figures in dark tactical gear moving silently through the overgrown garden. 1:55 p.m. One of the men signaled to the window. Margaret waved back, desperate. Then everything collapsed into chaos. The man, Diego, she assumed, used a crowbar to pry at the window frame. The old metal screamed as it gave way with a sound far too loud, the shriek echoing through the building. "What the hell is that?" Marcus roared from downstairs. "Now!" Diego shouted. "Jump!" Margaret didn't think. She threw herself through the opening. The fall was only 8 feet, but she landed badly, her ankle twisting with a sickening crunch. Pain exploded through her leg, but strong hands grabbed her, half dragging, half carrying her into the dense vegetation. "Run!" Diego commanded while gunshots cracked behind them, sharp, terrifying reports of actual firearms. Margaret screamed but kept moving, clinging to Diego as a second man in federal police colors covered their rear, returning fire. They reached a van hidden on a side street. Diego practically threw her inside as the vehicle accelerated before the door had even fully closed. "Isabella!" Margaret screamed, remembering the woman who'd saved her. "She's still inside." "She left last night with her daughters," Diego said, applying pressure to a cut on Margaret's arm she hadn't even noticed bleeding. "She contacted us 2 weeks ago. We've been building this case." Margaret began to shake uncontrollably, adrenaline, relief, shock, all converging at once. "What about Marcus?" she whispered. The federal officer in the front seat relayed something in rapid Portuguese. Diego translated grimly. "There are arrest warrants for 6 European and North American women extorted or disappeared over the last 4 years. 2 families have filed international complaints. Interpol is coordinating." "The other women on the board," Margaret said. "Ingrid, Sophie." Diego looked away. "They found remains on the property 2 days ago. Identification is pending, but—" Margaret closed her eyes as tears finally fell, understanding what he wasn't saying. At the federal police station in Rio, Margaret gave a statement for 8 hours. She described everything: the whiteboard with women's names and amounts, the room full of phones and documents, the threats, the isolation. Technicians recovered her deleted messages. She identified everyone: Marcus, Diego, Gustavo, Carlos. Marcus Ribeiro, not his real name, was arrested 48 hours later attempting to cross into Paraguay. Gustavo was captured with him. Carlos disappeared and was never found. 3 weeks later, Margaret sat in her apartment in New York. Her ankle was still bandaged. The purple bruises on her wrist where Marcus had twisted her arm were fading to sickly yellow-green. Caroline held her hand as they sat in silence. "You were right," Margaret finally said. "About all of it." "I wish I hadn't been," Caroline whispered. Margaret's phone rang. Diego calling from Brazil. "Marcus has been formally charged with extortion, kidnapping, and is a suspect in multiple homicides," Diego reported. "The trial will take years, but we have sufficient evidence. Isabella has testified." 2 other women found courage to speak out. Margaret never recovered her $40,000. Marcus had already spent it on bribes and operations. But she was alive. Some of the others weren't so lucky. At night, when nightmares came, and they came often, Margaret remembered Isabella's face. A desperate, poor woman who still chose to do the right thing. Who risked everything to save a stranger. Sometimes, Margaret learned, the only thing standing between survival and tragedy was a single act of human courage. Sometimes that was enough.